Hey everyone, great to have you back. Now, throughout this tutorial, we've already covered some ground. We learned how to use components, how to let them interact, what data binding is. We learned how to set up our routing, how to pass parameters with routing. So we really covered a lot of great fundamentals we'll need in our day-to-day applications. Now, there still are open issues on our to-do list, so to say. The way we handle the form currently is not the most elegant, and there are way better ways when it comes to handling forms in Angular 2. We never touched the issue of accessing the web, so accessing a RESTful server, for example. We'll have to do something about this in this course too. There are other things in Angular 2 that we haven't touched, like pipes. What are pipes? That's the thing I really want to talk about in a future video. We haven't built any custom structural directives, for example. We haven't discussed custom events and how to propagate those. So there are a lot of, as I said, open issues we'll have to tackle throughout this course. And in this video, we're going to start with the forms issue, because, as I said, there are great ways of managing and handling forms in Angular 2, and we'll learn one in this video. Then I'll have another video where I'll show you another, maybe even more elegant way of handling forms, and I'll also put up a separate forms video where I'll cover the complete topic in a, very form-specific way and not in the context of our overall tutorial like I'll do in this video. So you probably should watch both, but whatever, please leave your feedback and I'll be happy to have you with me on this course in the future. See you there. Bye. Now here is where we left off. We had our new contact form, which you could either access by clicking this button here and creating a new contact from an existing contact, or by just clicking new contact up here to create a completely new contact. Now, currently we're handling all this by assigning each input element here a local variable, and then when we hit submit, we're basically passing the values of our input fields through this local variable to our submit function. Now, as I already said, that is not the most elegant way, because if we add more input fields, we will have to introduce more and more local variables. We will then have to expand the list of arguments in our method here. If we ever change something to the method, we will have to do it here and at the bottom. So validation isn't even a thing in this case here. So that's really not the best way, especially as Angular 2 offers us some really great tools we can use when it comes to forms. Now, as I said, many tools, there are different ways of building forms with Angular 2, and which kind of way you want to choose depends on what you want to achieve. Now, I will show you the different ways, and then it's up to you to pick whatever you think suits your needs or whichever way you like best. In this video, we'll cover the way where we will use two-way data binding to build our form. So let's do this. So to do this, I'll go to my new contact component here. I already have it open. And first, I'll get rid of all these local variables here. I'll also get rid of this value field here. So let me do all that. And I'll also get rid of this click function here. Instead, this will get type submit. And now I'll do something which makes it look more like a form, and which is very important for Angular 2 being able to handle it as a form. I'll wrap this form into form tags. So that's not only more valid HTML5 or HTML in general, it, as I said, is also necessary for Angular 2 to recognize this block here as a form. Because whenever Angular 2 finds a form tag or a form element in the document tree, it will automatically attach the ngForm class or directive to that form element. And that's very important because we don't have to add any directive here, like writing ngForm equals anything or something like this. We don't have to do anything like this. Angular 2 will automatically do this for us. So this form is now under control, if you want to say it like this, of Angular 2. And there is an invisible ngForm attached to it. Now, as I just said, ngForm was automatically added to this form element here. So you may think of it this way. Every directive has its selector, like for ngForm, for example, that's the selector of the ngForm directive. Now ngForm has, let's say, two selectors. One would be ngForm and one would be form. And that's why every form element in our document is automatically an ngForm directive. And why is that so important? Because we can use methods and actions on this form or with this form that are only available due to the ngForm directive. And therefore it's very important for you to recognize that we have access to these methods even though we're never ever attaching ngForm here directly. It's done for us. Just want to point that out. Now that we get this form under control of Angular 2, well, we might want to access the overall validity of the form or the overall value of the complete form when it is submitted. So to do this, we can assign a local variable to this form, like let's say my form, and then set this equal to, and now the special clue comes, ngForm. So now here we're using ngForm, or we're setting a reference to our ngForm object. That's the best way to say it. That's the best way to describe this relation here. We're setting this local variable which holds a reference to our ngForm object, which in return is this whole form here. And specifically, it's an object of type control group. Now control group is an Angular 2 specific object which may hold several controls. And as you might already guess, controls are our inputs we have in a form. That are the controls. But we will have to specify our controls with the ngControl directive, and so that's what we're going to do now. So I'll just add a line break here so that we have a more structured way of reading this. The attributes or the directives I'm attaching to this input element. So I'll make this input element here a control of this form in the Angular 2 recognition, so to say, by attaching the ngControl directive. And then I'll just choose the name I want to have or under which I'll be able to access it. So now this input here is a control of this form to which I have a reference with this my form local variable here. And inside this form, I'll be able to access the, for example, validity or the value of this input field by using this name here, this because that's the control under which it is recognized in this overall form. Vice versa, the other inputs here are not part of the form as of now because I'm not setting the ngControl directive. Now, as I said, ngForm is of type control group, and the control group holds several controls. Therefore, we have to specify our controls. I'm really just pointing it out this way because it's very important to grab this concept. This ngControl will be automatically bound to the parent control group, so to the form, for example, here. Now we could also make this a control group here. We could add ngControl group here and then give this some random name here, control group. And now this form would have this control group matched to it, and this control group would hold all the ngControls we were to nest inside it. And therefore we can very detailed or just in the way we need it, access the, for example, validity and values of whole groups of controls. So for example, if we want to match the first and last name of a name together into different input fields, but it should be one control group. Then we could just check the control group for validity to check if both names have been entered, for example. Or we could go down one level and check each input field. So for now, I'm just going to remove this control group here, and I'll just have my ngControl here in my ngForm. Now that's been a lot of talking about this ngControl thing, but as I said, that's really the key concept of forms in Angular 2, and therefore it's very important to understand. Now we'll point out at this point already that there, as I said at the beginning of this video, is another way of doing forms in Angular 2, that is using the form builder, and there we won't have the ngControl attached to the input, but instead another directive, but we will see that when we're in that specific video. So enough talking about that. We got our ngControl here in our form, and now let's say I want to make this required, this input. So it's required to be filled out. Now recognize please that this is just an HTML5 validation attribute, so to say, just pure HTML here. And I'm going to add these two things here to each of my forms here. So that's gonna be, or each of my inputs here, excuse me. That's gonna be my last name. That's gonna be my phone number here. And that's gonna be my email. So this is my form. And yeah, that's just how it looks now. I set this to required, so currently this should all be invalid. Now let's see if this is true. Now as said, validation and so on would be very easy with Angular 2. Now all my fields here should currently be invalid because I set every input field to required and I haven't entered a single value. Now the cool thing is, if we have a form and that is controlled by Angular 2 as I said, and we have our controls in this form specified with ngControl, then each of these controls gets several CSS classes describing its current state. So if we go into inspection mode here, we see that this input has the ngPristine class. That means it is empty. The ngInvalid class, that means it's currently not valid because it is required and currently empty. That's derived by Angular 2 due to the HTML5 tag I got here. And it is ngTouched because, well, I clicked into it, therefore I did something there, I changed something there. If we look at the next input here, we get ngUntouched because I haven't clicked into it yet, therefore it is untouched. So we get these three descriptions, so to say, which we can use. Is it touched? Has the user done something with this input field? Is it empty, pristine, or dirty? There is some text in it. And is it valid or not valid? So if I go to my first input here and I just enter one single character, you see that it is now well touched, it is dirty because it is no longer empty, and it is valid because we have entered one character, and that is all the required attribute requires us to do. Now I can just abuse these automatically added CSS classes by going to my styles here, adding the ngInvalid selector here, so the CSS class ngInvalid, and I'll just give my input then a border of 1 pixel solid red. Now let me save this. As you can see, all my inputs are now red, and if I add the text, well, now it's no longer red. So that's basic validation here at Angular 2 with the form, the ngForm directive. And well, that's cool. Now we can validate our form. Now we also want to be able to send it. Previously we had our click event here on the button, and then we would send the value of each input. Well, it's easier with forms. We can't just go to the top of the form and notice that we have no action or method here. That's because we're not sending a request to the server here. But we can add another directive or an event here that is ngSubmit. Notice the parentheses, which always, as I explained, means we're having an event here. It's it's triggered by an action, in this case, that the submit button will be clicked. So this type submit is very important because if this button is clicked, this action here will be fired. So let's say I want to trigger the onSubmit function then. I don't pass any arguments to it. And here in the body of my component, I'll have my onSubmit function. And now I somehow need to pass the values. Now, how could I do this? Now, there are different ways. Well, one is I could somehow get a reference to this form and then, as all the controls are bound to it, access the value of these form controls. But there is a more elegant way. And as I said, we'll discover another very elegant way too in the next video. But this one, we're going to use two-way data binding. So I'll just get rid of this past last name because I won't need it anymore. And I'll just add a new property here, which I will call just new contact, which will be of type contact. So that will be just the object we'll data bind to. And I will add this on each of my controls here. So just the good old data binding, two-way data binding we know with ngModel, and bind it to new contact.firstName here. And I'll just copy that, bind that to last name, bind that to phone, and that, unsurprisingly, to email. So now I got my two-way data binding here going on. And now I want to cope for the fact that I can pass a parameter to this form and have my last name already filled out. Therefore, I will change this here in my ngOnInit method. And instead of setting this past last name, I will set my new contact to, well, a new contact just here, where I will bind the last name to this value we're getting here, or we're possibly getting through our routing. And I'll also set the first name. Well, that's just going to be an empty string. Last name is this value. The phone number will be an empty string, and the email will be an empty string too. So now we get this new contact set when we load up this form. And you can already see this if I go here and I click create new contact. You can see my last name is already filled out, so that's working. Now, as this is two-way data binding, I can change all these values and they will get added to this new contact. But to actually see that or to send that back and create it in our list, I'll just use my onSubmit function here, or method here. And here, there's one simple thing I'll do, or two things I'll do. The first one is I'll call my contact service, and I'll insert a contact. And which contact will I insert? Well, exactly, the new contact, because it will be bound to this form. And the second thing is, well, I'll just navigate back. Copy that, get rid of this onAddContact, we're not using it anymore. Now let me save this, and let's get back here, load her. Click create contact. Well, that is HTML5, so just gonna fill that out with some dummy value. Create, and now we can see our contact here. And that is how easy we can create a new contact with ngForm and the two-way data binding. And now compare this to our last solution. Here it's very simple to add new inputs or anything like this, as long as our model we're binding to supports it, but that will always be the premise, because otherwise why would we want a value we're not storing anywhere in our application? So if that's the case, well, we won't have to change any arguments in this function here or in our function below down here. No, all we have to do is bind to this model, and that's really everything. And then we will just send our new contact to the contact service here. And if we weren't to have the possibility of creating a new contact with the last name, so if this form wouldn't exist with a possibility of a pre-filled input field. Well, this part wouldn't be necessary, and then all we would have is this line here and our standard form with ngSubmit and ngControl to handle the whole form, including the validation. And that, I think, is really a strong argument for Angular 2, because that is really fun and really easy to do. So that was quite a long video, because there were some key things I really wanted to stress and to emphasize. So I hope you now have a good picture of how you can build forms in Angular 2 and how you can take advantage of the built-in tools. Now, I'll be honest, there are other advantages we could use by using the ngForm directive that I haven't even told you here. For example, we can, as we're binding to the form here, we can add a local variable here, add an input, and just bind this to ngForm as well, which will then not bind to the whole form, but instead to this single input field here. Now that would allow us to do something like adding a span behind it that is only shown if the first name is valid. Valid is just a property we can access due to in a control, in a ng. Control is the class which will be inserted here, so to say, or referenced here with the ngControl directive. So we can access this valid property and check if it is not valid to display like a text of not valid here. And if we now save this, we see we got not valid here, which disappears when we type something. So we can bind to elements or to input elements by using this ngForm reference here. We also could, for example, bind to our overall form here by using the disabled binding here and saying if my form, I think I called it, did I call it my form? Yeah. If my form is, there I have to access the form property and then valid. If that is not valid, well, then this button should be disabled, so I can't click it until I filled out everything here. Then I can click it, and now I got my contact here. So that was really quick, because I think that talks for itself, but that are the concepts which I haven't covered in detail here, but there will be future videos coming up on this channel for sure. And the next one will talk about the form builder, which is another way of approaching that form issue. Well, obviously not totally different, but for example, it doesn't use two-way data binding. It has another approach, and well, you will see everything in the next video. See you there. Have a nice day. Bye.